Good morning, Dan and Amy. So President Obama spoke before the Disabled American Veterans Convention, and he's, tired of people trash talking our military. That's what he's tired of.
Else about this generation. As Commander-in-Chief, I'm pretty tired of some folks trash talking America's military and troops.
And let me tell you what he's going to do about it.
And we're going to keep him doing everything we need to do to improve readiness and modernize our forces.
Yeah, improve readiness and modernize our forces, because that's what people are actually discussing when they suggest the military is in disrepair. It is not an attack on military service members, of course. President Obama offering his customary disingenuous defense of an argument that isn't being offered. And retired Lieutenant General from the Air Force, who heads an aerospace institute now, Lieutenant General Deptula, was at an American Enterprise event talking specifically about the Air Force. Here's how he characterized the Air Force in which he served and reached the rank of general.
The bottom line is we're operating a geriatric Air Force. We have fighters that are 55 years old, tankers that are just as old. We're operating training aircraft that are 40 years old. Our fighters and helicopters are 30 years old.
He went on to say, just to provide a bit of comparison, average age of Air Force aircraft, 27 years. By comparison, commercial aircraft, 10 years. This is what the discussion is in terms of our military preparedness, the resources devoted to make sure that we have the capacity to deal with all of the external threats that we face and to fulfill our role as the world's one superpower. And President Obama doesn't want to address those issues. But someone who does is our friend KT McFarland, Fox News national security analyst, who joins us now. KT, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan. Good morning, Amy.
Good morning. So before we get to Libya, what about the president's remarks, kind of his rah-rah speech at that Disabled American Veterans Convention, where he kind of glosses over the very real concerns that have been expressed about our military preparedness?
At this point, Dan, I don't listen to him anymore.
Okay, well, that's fair.
Lame duck president, weak lame duck president, and throughout his presidency, his deeds have never matched his words. His words sound terrific, but he doesn't. There's a complete disconnect. So when he says, we're going to do readiness, are you kidding? He's gutted readiness in the budget. When he's talked about the honor, I don't like to trash talk the troops. Okay, fine, but what have you done for the troops? You've put them into wars that they can't win. You've taken the sacrifices they've made in the Iraq War, which may have been a disaster, but by the time you inherited it, when it was handed off to you, it was a victory, and you seized defeat from the jaws of victory, and now you're just tossing American troops into Iraq, into Libya, into Syria, into Afghanistan, not with any intention of winning or doing what it would take to win. No, you don't want to do that. You just don't want to lose. You just don't want to have it on your record. You want to be able to leave your legacy and tell the American people, and I guess the historians and the people you hang around with at the faculty clubs, look, Bush started these wars, and the next guy lost them. Me, I had a clean record.
And so is this what he's doing in your estimation with the drone strikes in Sirte in Libya?
Yep.
So do you think this is arrogance or laziness or just...
I think it's just a completely different worldview. Amy, here's the thing. There is a worldview, and that's what I think the election really is about. And if it doesn't sort itself out this election, it will in 2020. And it's two very different worldviews of America's place in the world. I think the progressives, the Democrats, the liberals, the Obamas, the Clintons, they think that America has not been a force for good in the world. They look at America and say we're polluting the planet, we're responsible for global warming, we're responsible for wealth inequality, we're responsible for poverty at home and abroad. We started wars. We're not necessarily good guys, and they usually harken back to slavery at some point. The other side of it is that America has been a force for good in the world, and American global leadership has made the world a better place. And when America steps back from global leadership, you have the chaos that you now have today. So I think that's what the worldview of President Obama is. If America would just step back from its disastrous leadership, then somehow other nations would step forward and we'd live in some global international rules-based order and kumbaya and we'll all live in world peace. unfortunately, it's proven absolutely wrong.
Yeah, that kind of have a Coke and a smile foreign policy. So here's a question going back to the faculty club you mentioned. Stephen Cohen, who's a deep thinker at Princeton and NYU, he sort of rallied to the defense, surprisingly, of Donald Trump over the weekend on CNN when the matter of Donald Trump's relationship with Putin and Russia has been raised, and the intimations and, frankly, explicit statements by the Clinton campaign surrogates that Donald Trump is some kind of double agent for Putin.
I know. He's the Manchurian candidate.
Right. And Stephen Cohen said, actually, he went beyond that to dismiss that as silliness, but he said he said that we're kind of on the cusp of a new Cold War, and Trump is trying to move U.S. policy away from such a confrontational posture to one that is more conciliatory is perhaps the wrong word, but at least one that more engages Russia so as to derail the possibility of a new Cold War. Is that an assessment you agree with?
Yeah, I look at the world today and say we're in a very similar place than we were in 1980, where the conventional wisdom isn't working. I mean, look at the last 15 years of American foreign policy. I don't think anybody thinks it's a success, except for maybe the people who are directly involved and they can't admit their failures. Iraq and Afghanistan are wars we lost. The global economy is not to our advantage. Europe is falling apart. Russia is becoming expansionist and pushing its weight around again, and China wants to grab as much of the South China Sea and world trade as it can. So I think we're at a point where time to rethink this. And how would you rethink it? Well, we've been tethered to the Middle East for decades because we've needed their oil. We don't need their oil anymore. That gives us options we didn't have in the past. On the other hand, global Islamic Jihad is now an international global movement, and it wants to destroy Western civilization. That's a new challenge, but yet the way we've dealt with it in the last 15 years has been a failure. It's spread, despite our efforts. Bush said we're going to fight him over there, so we don't have to fight him over here. Obama went in, he went out, he went in, he's now out. That hasn't worked either. And at the same time, we see a growing China, economically dominant, mostly because it steals our intellectual property, and a Russia that's trying to maybe start a new Cold War. So I think it's time to rethink it. And maybe one of the ways you rethink it is to figure out how to deal with the Russians where we cooperate over what we have in common, which is the defeat global radical Islamic Jihad against us all, and then maybe give them something, but to get something back, which is hands off Europe. So I think there's a possibility of a potential grand bargain where we rethink a lot of our relationships. I don't think Hillary Clinton will do it. Will Donald Trump? He has the opportunity. Will he do it? Who knows?
Yeah, but Donald Trump said on with George Stephanopoulos that Russia is not going to be taking over Ukraine.
Well, I would.
And how does he allegedly know this information?
Well,
I think what he's saying, what the implication was, and I looked at that interview several times to figure out what was. I think the way he was saying it was, look, Crimea, Russia already has Crimea. It's had it for 2 years. You don't get that back. But if I'm president, I'll find a new way of relating to Russia so that it does not go back into Ukraine. To me, I don't think the Russians are going to go back into Ukraine or try to take all of Ukraine. I think what the Russians have their eye on are the Baltics. And I think maybe the next 2 or 3 weeks, I'm going to watch what the Russians do because Putin likes to do stuff during the Olympics.
And
that's right.
Yeah, even when he's not hosting it. And
he's mad now because the Russian track and field aren't there. They've been banned because of doping.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, I mean, we've had our Lance Armstrongs. He has his entire team. So
a third of them got to go.
So, just going back to Trump, though, in this area of foreign policy, since, the question of temperament and some of the statements he's made and the elliptical way in which he speaks about some of these matters, Trump's statements about NATO and, even kind of foreign affairs wonks would suggest that it's okay to ask the question, what's NATO's role in the 21st century and does it need to be updated and changed and rethought and reconsidered and relaunched? What is your assessment of what Trump has said about NATO and NATO's importance to our nation's overall national defense?
Well, again, I went and looked. I mean, I saw the headlines like everybody else, which made it sound like he was pulling out of NATO. But I went and read what he actually said, and he said at the very beginning, look, the countries aren't doing their fair share that they've pledged to do. And at the end of the sentence, he said, but I believe in NATO. Now, the mainstream media took off the I believe in NATO part and just focused on we're thinking of pulling out of NATO because they're not doing their fair share. You know, presidents of both political parties, including President Obama, who's called the European members of NATO freeloaders. There's even a word for it. It's called burden sharing. They have not done their fair share. Now, nobody's been able to figure out how to get them to do their fair share. So maybe the threat of rejiggering NATO or questioning our commitment to it, maybe it'll get them to ante up and to do what they have the ability to do, but they've just refused to because they figure, well, America's been the main force in NATO for so long, we'll just let them keep doing that, even though the economic situation and power of Europe has grown considerably since the first NATO treaty was agreed 65 years ago. So maybe Trump has, maybe this is a good negotiating strategy. Nothing else worked.
All right. She is KT McFarland, Fox News national security analyst. KT, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.